Prom is finally here. The celebration after a long week of studying and test taking. It was just in some hotel on the outskirts of Gettysburg, but it was still a party. Your parents are excited to see the historic place, but growing up so close, Gettysburg just feels like some other town. A friend's mom suggests that you take your prom pictures in one of the battlefields. You don't really see why not. The battlefields are on the way to the hotel, and since it was near sunset, there wouldn't be anyone else around.
So you stop with your friends, going through all the cliche poses. One of them even dares to climb up and sit on one of the cannons. When the laughter quiets down, you hear something in the distance. A rumbling, maybe thunder? But as you listen, it gets closer, and you recognize it as drums. A drum roll meant to keep a marching army moving forward. The parents in the group brush it off, saying it must be reenactors, but they usher you back into the cars and away from the battlefields with a quiet urgency.
You go through the pictures you took, deciding which ones are worth posting and deleting others. One catches your eye. Your friend that sat on top of the cannon, posing smugly. Just next to your friend is a gray blur, the shape of a human torso dressed in a tattered uniform. But that's just your mind playing tricks on you, isn't it? I'm Bree.
I'm Christiana.
And I'm Teddy.
Settle in and don't open your doors.
Because you're about to hear something strange.
Welcome to episode 3, Gettysburg.
So what do we all know about Gettysburg, friends?
Who wants to go first?
Also, welcome Teddy, who is our guest.
Yay!
Hi again!
Hi again, yes.
You haven't been on any of our Something Strange episodes, have you?
Correct.
Yet. Okay, yeah, so if you've listened to Sauntering Vaguely Podwords, the other podcast that Bree and I started, Teddy has been a guest on some of those episodes, and we love them.
Yes.
So they're back! Yay!
Whether they want to be or not.
Yeah! You're part of the pod crew now, officially.
Wow!
Such an honor.
Great.
Such an honor.
Stuck with me now.
Say
what
how
do
we
we
want
know?
to break this down.
Oh, we should say what we know about Gettysburg, too. We never answered your question.
Oh, yeah. That's all right.
I both know very little and, a lot. It's a very, Gettysburg really is just another town in my brain because I grew up 45 minutes south, so it was just a town you drove to when you wanted to go shopping.
Yeah, same for me.
So I grew up a little bit further away than you lovely folks did. It was a little bit less of that experience for me. Now, I will say I know more than the average person about the battle itself and the spooky stuff, as is my area of expertise.
Yes.
My grandfather was a big historian, so, he knew all the history and everything, even not just Gettysburg, but in general.
Okay.
History was genuinely one of my worst subjects in school, so I know I paid attention. Did I retain any of it? Not really.
That was me too, and it's funny because now
Really?
it's funny because I'm a historical reenactor now, but I think I was most interested in school in World War II. I feel like that's a lot of people.
That makes sense.
Yes. But even that, I didn't know a lot of what I know about history that I know now until I met my current partner and, became a reenactor and started, learning stuff.
I liked old history in school, which makes sense because of one of my undergrad degrees.
Yeah.
More anthropology, religious studies based.
Mm-hmm.
So, I liked, ancient cultures.
Right.
I like history in general, but I liked ancient cultures the best.
Yes.
My understanding of history leans a similar way yours does, because my studies in high school always leaned towards art and fashion.
Mm-hmm.
So I always studied fashion cycles and more culture than I ever did, battles.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Except, fantasy battles. I could tell you all about Lord of the Rings.
Listen, I think we all have our version of a fantasy battle we can reenact from memory.
Yes, Harry Potter for me, babes. So, kind of how we are breaking this episode down for our lovely listeners is we each took a part of the script and are rolling with it. So, Teddy is going to talk about the town of Gettysburg before the battle. For those who may not know, Gettysburg is very famous for a battle, a very bloody battle during the American Civil War. It was roughly the midpoint of the war, I believe.
Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. There's a Gettysburg, Ohio, too.
So yes, Teddy is going to be doing the history of Gettysburg before the battle. I am going to take the reins on what happened during the Battle of Gettysburg during the American Civil War. And then Bree is going to be latching on to some of the paranormal and
spooky shit?
Yeah. I'm trying to not superstitious, the supernatural happenings, the lore that very much surrounds all of Gettysburg. If you grew up around here or you knew anything about Gettysburg, it's very much known for its spooky stories and its hauntings because, really horrible stuff happened here. Happened there. We're not sitting in Gettysburg right now. So, without further ado, I'm going to give you the reins here.
Oh boy. Well...
You got it.
Gettysburg really only existed for about 100 years before the Civil War. And really, Adams County, funny enough, only existed about 60 years before the Civil War.
Okay.
Gettysburg was originally part of Western York County before Adams County was created, I guess.
Formed. I don't know.
Formed.
Really quick, can I throw in here when the dates, the years of the Civil War?
1861 to 1865.
Okay, perfect.
I think.
I'm pretty sure you're right.
There's some things I remember. I'm not trying to steal your thunder.
No, you're fine. What were the years of...
Because Gettysburg was the middle point.
Yes. April 12th, 1861 to April 9th, 1865. So it was literally almost exactly 4 years.
Wow.
That the battle was fought, which is kind of crazy. So 1861 to 1865.
So I forgot to write down the exact years that the first European settlers kind of arrived to the Gettysburg area as it was then. Believe it was the 1730s, 1740s.
Okay.
And while there were not indigenous peoples at that time living on that land, they still used that land.
Sure.
Europeans at this time had a concept that they used a Latin phrase for, terra nullius, if I'm doing any of that Latin correct.
Sounds close.
I'll take it.
Terra nullius.
Which, when they saw just these swaths of forest that was the land pre-colonization, they were like, it's empty, we can take it. Supposedly, there was no initial contact until the the French and Indian Wars.
Oh, wow.
One website I looked at for some of the information said that there were quote-unquote raids of the European farms that had cropped up there. Mm-hmm. But some of the language really kind of reminded me about implicit biases. And I'm like, I wonder how much of this is exaggerated.
Versus, actually. Sure.
Yeah, I wonder...
Because we gotta look at it through, the historical lens, of course. Everything is gonna be written in, quote-unquote, the winner's favor, so...
Yeah, and it was very much what are they trying to portray? Who's writing this and for what purpose?
And it's probably a silly question. So, most of the records we get are from the European settlers. Did the indigenous people have a written records that we would be able, you know what I mean? What I'm saying?
Yeah.
We're only hearing the European side because we don't necessarily have primary records from the indigenous.
And a lot of the indigenous peoples' tribes had actually moved closer to the Susquehanna. Mm-hmm. There were people in the area. Another article I read said there have been artifacts, stone artifacts, arrowheads, cutting tools, grindstones, that are between 2,000 and 4,000 years old. Obviously, there were people there at one point.
Sure.
But they migrated closer to the rivers for agriculture,
Water's important.
Yeah. Water's very important.
See our episode about albatrosses.
Yeah.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah, we talked about the Susquehanna tribes in that episode.
So Gettysburg was kind of founded to totally move on from this point, move on to the next point. Gettysburg was created as kind of an intersection of the roadways from Baltimore to Shippensburg, which is the North-South Railroad, and then Pittsburgh to Philadelphia, which would have been east-west.
Okay.
Gettysburg became kind of this traveler's town. So there would be taverns, there were carriage repair shops, carriage houses, tanneries, anything you might kind of need while you're on this giant road trip, either Baltimore to Shippensburg or vice versa.
Like a supply town almost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of these taverns was built in 1761 by Samuel Geddes. As you can hear, that's where Gettysburg came from. Some report that it was Sam Geddes that is quoted as the founder of the town. Others say it's his son James, because James purchased about 116 acres and built between 210 and 220 lots where buildings were built.
Dang.
Yeah, just a casual 200 buildings built.
Yeah, really.
And that was actually James divided this land in 1786, which is really when it became Gettysburg.
Like the town of Gettysburg versus just like a shanty town type of thing.
Yeah.
Sure.
When it was, again, as I said earlier, in 1786, when it was Gettysburg, it was still a part of Western York County, and it wasn't until 1800 that Adams County was created and named after the current president.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
So that's why it's Adams County, which...
The president at that time, okay.
John Adams?
There we go.
I'm trying to say Sam Adams, and I'm like, no. Nope. Nope. Not correct.
That sure is beer. In 1858 is when the Gettysburg Railroad was completed, and a year later the railroad station was opened. And then by 1860, there were approximately 450 buildings that were carriage manufacturing, shoemakers, tanneries, merchants, banks, taverns. It was really become into its own as Gettysburg as we see it today. Mm-hmm. If, 150 years ago. 160? Math.
Something like that. The battle was over 150 years ago.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So it sounds like, we're getting ready to transition from before the battle to the battle. So at this time, it sounds like it was a pretty thriving town. It might not have been people that were staying there all the time, but it wasn't a sleepy little town. It
wasn't
like a huge town though, right? There weren't like a lot of people living there.
But moving through.
There were definitely a lot of and with all those manufacturing jobs and businesses, there would have been people living, a large population living there.
Okay.
I actually really didn't I didn't seek out intentionally the population at the time.
Sure.
And I don't remember it in just passing.
Okay. That's alright. If you don't mind me diving in here.
Yeah.
With the Battle of Gettysburg, this is, I mentioned earlier, something very much that Gettysburg is known for at this point. If you've heard Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, you know the Battle of Gettysburg happened here mid-American Civil War. And
if you don't mind me just commenting, that was actually something I struggled with, is no one wanted to talk about Gettysburg before the battle. Mm-hmm. It seems like it should have been a very important town because it sat at this crossroads.
Sure.
But I had 3 articles that came up online that talked about, and one article I had was specifically for the indigenous tribes. Mm-hmm. A second was, I had a paragraph that was pre-battle.
Okay.
And then the third page, I had to look at Wikipedia for any information.
Yeah, it's crazy because everyone wants to focus on the battle side of it, and afterwards it's like, no, this place existed before then.
Yeah.
But this was my area that I took hold of in the script, was the actual Battle of Gettysburg. So let's talk about that for a minute. The Battle of Gettysburg is commonly referred to as the turning point of the American Civil War. I've heard it commonly stated that the Confederacy was winning the war up to Gettysburg, but honestly, in the research I was doing, I didn't really know that it didn't feel to me like that was the case. Now, granted, I didn't dig too deep into it. I was going to try to have like a rough timeline of the Civil War leading up to the Battle of Gettysburg to try to explain like, oh yeah, this is definitely shows the Confederacy was winning. To me, it felt like I was like, this doesn't really feel like there was solid evidence stating absolutely yes. And I was seeing like on different like, now granted, this is not the most reliable resource, but I was getting desperate in like forums and Reddit and things like that. Like people were talking about, was this really the turning point? Was the Confederacy winning? You know, what happened here? And it seems like it's actually kind of, again, very basic research. It's a little bit up in the air in the historical community as well, whether this is truly considered like the turning point. I did include the timeline of the American Civil War from the Library of Congress website in the works cited of this episode for anyone interested in looking a little bit deeper into this. But a couple of points I did see definitively in my research that supported like the turning point of the tide theory was that the Union victory at Gettysburg gave the North, the Union, a huge morale boost, and it did put a stop to Confederate General Robert E. Lee's plan to invade the North, because it does sound like his army was very strong. So the Battle of Gettysburg began shortly after 7 a.m. on July 1st, 1863, and ended on July 3rd, 1863. By the time the dust settled, over 50,000 casualties were laying dead or wounded. So I have a very brief timeline of the battle here. I tried to keep this as brief as possible, but this is very complex, so bear with me. General Robert E. Lee had won several defensive battles in the South and was very bolstered by these victories, so he intended to win a battle north of the Mason-Dixon line in an attempt to force negotiations to end the war. The Mason-Dixon line, so named for Charles Mason and Jeremiah Dixon, who surveyed the line, was originally the dividing line between Pennsylvania and Maryland. Before the Civil War, it was known as the boundary between slaveholding states and free states. So Robert E. Lee wanted to get past this line, because so far he had won a bunch of battles, but they were on his own turf. He wanted to win a battle in enemy territory. The troops were also going to stock fresh supplies on this journey, as well as food. Virginia, where Robert E. Lee came from, was ravaged by war at this point, and it really wasn't able to sustain the number of troops that were fighting for the Confederacy. Meanwhile, on the Union side, the Union had undergone several military leader changes. President Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln, might have heard of him, felt that the current commander of the Union Army, so his name was Joseph Hooker, was not being aggressive enough in his campaign. Joseph Hooker was nervous to confront Lee's army again because the Union troops had suffered a nasty defeat in the Battle of Chancellorsville, which again, very, very basic research into this. I did not do a lot into Chancellorsville, but it sounds like it was a really ugly defeat. Yeah.
What state was that in?
Chancellorsville is... I'm sorry, hang on, please hold. I think it is Virginia. Chancellorsville is in Virginia. Nasty defeat in Chancellorsville, Virginia. So Joseph Hooker was replaced by General George Meade several weeks before the Battle of Gettysburg, and Meade's orders were to keep the troops between Lee's army and Washington, D.C. So on hearing from Confederate Cavalry Commander Jeb Stuart that the Union Army was much closer than they initially thought, Lee turned his troops to Gettysburg. The army concentrated in nearby Cashtown. 35, 40-ish minutes from Gettysburg, so it's close. So day 1, July 1st. The beginning of the battle was more or less a surprise. It wasn't a planned, like, oh, we're going to attack on this day. It just kind of happened. So it began early in the morning of July 1st. A Confederate division was headed towards Gettysburg on a mission to seize supplies, and they ran into a Union cavalry unit, and the first shot was fired a little after 7 a.m. From there, the skirmish escalated into a battle that lasted all day in sweltering temperatures. I don't have a solid article to back up, like I didn't research the weather, but from what I know about Gettysburg and what I've heard before about the battle, enjoy the sirens, friends. It was sweltering, disgusting temperatures.
So I think the reason we know that is because some of the professors at Gettysburg College kept notes on the kept notes on the weather in their journals.
Right.
Yes.
Because Gettysburg College was there at that point.
Yes.
Okay, sure.
Yes, I had come across that. I think there were three colleges at one point.
Oh, cool.
In Gettysburg. Gettysburg College. One other. And then they mentioned Harrisburg Community College, which is just outside of Gettysburg for some reason.
Yeah. What up, Hack?
Didn't Chambersburg see battle too?
Yes.
Am I making that up?
Yes, there
I'm
was.
Not making that up. Okay, I should know this.
There was a battle in Chambersburg. The circle of Chambersburg, the square, the cannons that were there are a memorial to that battle. I believe those cannons actually did see fighting. If I don't quote me for gospel, but I believe those cannons actually did see battle.
And a lot of the towns in this area, because Hanover saw battle as well. So, but anyways, that's not the purpose of today's. Today's venture.
Right. So the temperatures were, I mean, it's July, so it was very hot. If I remember correctly, it was very humid, and the air was very still. There was no wind whatsoever. It was just foul. And keep in mind, when these armies were fighting, the uniforms of the time, I'm going to do my best with men's clothing here. I've never actually...
wool.
Yeah, well, it was definitely wool, but I think it would have been a shirt. Yeah. Would they have worn... I don't know if they had vests as part of their uniform.
No, it was at least one undershirt.
Yes.
And then their wool coats.
Did the Confederacy wear vests? Because I know my partner, because he reenacted Confederacy, he has like a vest that has like the buttons on it. Don't quote me. Sorry.
No, I'm racking my brain.
I should have looked that up. I'm not an expert, but either way, they were wearing a lot of layers, long sleeves, at least a long sleeve shirt and a jacket, if not a vest underneath, carrying heavy ammo, heavy boots, heavy guns, at least... I don't know if the foot soldiers, if infantry had sabers, but at the very least, cavalrymen had sabers. They were packing, plus hats on their head. It was boiling. Like, they would have been just roasted alive trying to fight in these conditions. It would have been horrible.
It's hard to tell. Mm-hmm. A lot of what we seem to have left are just the outer jackets.
Sure.
There is a portrait of a gentleman who I can't... it's black and white, so yeah. I don't know which uniform it is.
Sure.
Who has a vest, but it is a posed portrait. So I'm thinking
so it might have been like...
part of like a dress uniform, like how the military has formal dress uniforms now.
Right. Well, and I know at least on the Confederacy side, the uniforms tended to change up a little bit. A lot of people associate the two different sides, like the Union, the northern side wore dark navy blue, and the Confederacy wore gray. But they also had, like, different color. They had different shades of gray. It was almost like shades of taupey brown in some of their uniforms. So stuff changed a lot with the Confederacy. That might have been a supply issue thing. Again, I say, do not quote me. But either way, these poor men out here would have been just roasting while trying to literally fight for their lives. No matter what side they were on, they were fighting for their lives in boiling temperatures. It was awful. So by the end of the day of day one, the Confederates had forced Union troops back through the town to Cemetery Hill. I'm going to do the best I can to try and describe some of these landmarks. If you're not looking at a map or you're not looking like in the town itself, it's kind of hard to describe, but I'm going to do my best for you guys. So Cemetery Hill was and is a landmark on the Gettysburg battlefield named for the cemetery that was, and again still is, at the base. This landmark would be a continuous place of battle over the next 2 days. So orders were given by General Lee, the Confederate general, to attack Cemetery Hill. But the orders were declined because the commander of the the commander of the Confederacy believed that the Union position on the hill was too strong. So they were afraid to attack it for fear of getting their tails kicked. There's a lot of weird back and forth between General Lee and his commanders, and even certain stuff like between the Union generals and their second-in-commands that I noticed doing the research into this. I didn't go too far into it because, again, this is really complex history, and to do it justice, I would have to take like 3 hours.
I was about to say, we could probably do
a whole season.
Yeah, we could probably do at least an episode for each day.
About the Battle of Gettysburg. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
I also didn't know you could just tell your commander no.
I know. I saw that too, and I'm like, you just said no. He's like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm like,
how about we don't do this and we do this instead?
I guess if your commander makes a stupid decision, you can be like, hey,
I'm not.
I've heard that the Union was desperate for experienced.
Yes, yeah. That was some of what I researched because, like I said, they had been through several changes in command under President Lincoln because there were people that were, they had just gone. I think there was one commander that had been through like military school, but he wasn't battle tested. Then there was Joseph Hooker, who was like kind of afraid to make a move. I believe there were some other commanders, and same deal. They were just not, essentially, in Lincoln's eyes, weren't being aggressive enough.
And might I say, this is also kind of a weird position for a lot of generals on both sides.
Sure.
Because many of the experienced ones had fought together in previous, like before the Civil War. But they would have fought together in previous battles, or they would have been trained together.
That's what I was going to say. They could have been through school together. I mean, that's the thing about the Civil War. It's hard because
it was really brother against brother. Like, that's not an exaggeration.
And there are certain parts of it that, and we can cut this out again if you guys don't feel this is appropriate for me to say, but there are certain parts of it that are pretty black and white. But then there's other parts of the American Civil War that really, it's a lot of gray. It's a lot of gray. And I'm not going to go any further into it because I'm not trying to start an argument with anyone, but it was very, very, very complex. And I think we try to simplify it in today's historical views, and it doesn't work to do that. It's important. I think it's really important to state what was right and wrong about certain things that led up to the war, but I think it's also important to state that there was a lot of ugly on both sides, and I truly believe there was a lot of good on both sides. And it's literally family members split apart and loved ones split apart, and it just, the whole thing, it was an ugly conflict. And so back to Cemetery Hill. Union reinforcements arrived by dusk that day to fortify the hill and to extend the defensive line along Cemetery Ridge to another historical landmark called Little Round Top. Little Round Top is the smaller of two hills that stand right beside each other. The larger hill is appropriately named Big Round Top. And I'm going to go ahead and put this here because it is going to be important later. Another landmark that is at kind of the base of Little Round Top is a large cluster of boulders called Devil's Den. We're going to talk about that later. It's important.
In multiple parts of this.
That's where we went. When my friend was like, let's sit on the cannon.
Yeah. I was like, we didn't go to Gettysburg, Teddy.
You're like, what?
My friend
who sat on the cannon.
I did not. I'm not that confident.
No, your friend who sat on the cannon.
Yes.
Yeah. So, day 2, July 2nd, the Union Army held several strong points from another landmark, Culp's Hill, to Cemetery Ridge. For reference, Culp's Hill is closer to town, so the Union line would have stretched from there to Cemetery Hill and along Cemetery Ridge to Little Round Top. It's often described as a fish hook, which is relative. Again, it's hard to explain this when I don't have a visual medium to point things out, but it's roughly the shape of a J or a fish hook, the Union line. The Confederates had a line that stretched longer than the Union line and kind of wrapped around at each end. The Union was really, really dug in. So General Lee ordered an attack on the Union line, but his second-in-command, General Longstreet, was against this decision, again, with commanders going, no. The article... I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was like,
No.
I just walks away.
It's just, no.
Sorry,
I'm going to
guys.
go get coffee. I'll be back. Have fun, guys.
I'm gonna go to McDonald's.
Yeah, I'm going to go to the McDonald's on Steinware. Have fun storming the
That
castle.
won't be here for like another 100 years. Okay, anyway, sorry, I'll stop.
No, you're fine. The article I read was that Longstreet was more defensively minded. So he really didn't want to go on the offense, essentially. That being said, the attack was delayed. Longstreet was ordered to attack early in the day, but the charge didn't actually happen until 4 p.m. that night. Or I guess you could say that afternoon. This delay actually allowed for more Union troops to arrive, so that was a mistake on the behalf of the Confederacy. And it allowed the Union line to hold up to this attack. So Longstreet attacked the Union troops along the left flank around 4 p.m. These Union troops held the area of Little Round Top and Devil's Den, as well as a nearby peach orchard and wheat field. Another Confederate general, I am not 100% sure how this is pronounced. It's spelled E-W-E-L-L. I'm going to say Ewell, but it might be Ewell. If it's wrong, I'm really sorry, guys. So this general attacked the Union line to the right, which held Culp's Hill and Cemetery Hill at the same time as Longstreet's attack. So essentially, the Confederates are attacking each end of the line. By the end of the day, the Confederates had been able to take the wheat field, the peach orchard, and the landmark Devil's Den, as well as some ground on the northern end of the Union line, but overall, the Union line held pretty strong. Okay, on to day 3, July 3rd. Early on day 3, the Union Army withstood a 7-hour firefight at Culp's Hill in an attempt to take back the ground that had been lost the day before. Eventually, the Confederate line was pushed back by the Union line. General Lee believed the Union was weakened and decided to make an assault against the center of the Union line along Cemetery Ridge. An artillery barrage began the assault before 3 Confederate divisions charged the line. These divisions consisted of less than 15,000 men. One resource that I used stated it was 12,500 men. And half of these men were under the division of Brigadier General George Pickett. So around 3 p.m., the Confederates charged the Union troops who were dug in behind a stone wall that's at the top of Cemetery Ridge. In comparison, the Confederates were marching across open field. It also turned out that this massive artillery barrage that they did in advance of this charge, they had done this to try and weaken the Union troops. It more or less just warned the Union that they were coming. Oops. So while these 3 Confederate divisions charged forward, other Union regiments attacked the Confederates at the flanks. So essentially, they were getting fired on by all sides. This was a bloodbath. It was an absolute disaster. One brigade of Confederates actually did reach the top of Cemetery Ridge, but they were ultimately forced back, and this area would come to be known as the high water mark of the Confederacy. This charge was also known as Pickett's Charge and would end with disastrous consequences. Close to 60% of the Confederate force was casualty. Because, they got fired on forwards and from each side. It was a mess. Yeah.
I'm asking a lot of questions.
No, ask questions.
So when we're talking casualty, are we talking people who were killed or injured? Or, is it more people who died versus injured? Or
it was both.
Okay.
So, ugly stuff. Either way, over half of their forces were either wiped out through dying or through getting injured.
Okay.
And they couldn't fight anymore.
I wasn't sure what that what casualty meant in that.
Right.
Context.
Yeah.
Sure. July 4th rolled around. In general, Lee waited for a counterattack, but the Union never made a move. So that night, under heavy rainfall, because after all these 3 days of just sweltering, disgusting, humid temperatures, it started to thunderstorm. I believe it started to thunderstorm. That night, General Lee withdrew his troops in a retreat to Virginia. General Meade did not pursue the Confederates in their retreat, which actually caused him to be criticized later. Had he pursued the troops, it's thought that the Confederates could have been forced to surrender and end the war, like right there and then. President Lincoln was later quoted as saying, "We had only to stretch forth our hands and they were ours." That's a rough timeline. Very quick, very dirty. Again, Teddy said it earlier, we could probably dedicate an entire episode each to every single day of the battle. But you get the gist of what happened. The Union won. Ugly casualties on both sides. I have a couple details here about the battle and battlefield, just little bits and pieces that I wanted to talk about more. By the end of the battle, on the Union side, 3,155 men were killed, 14,529 were wounded, and 5,365 were missing and captured. On the Confederate side, 3,903 were killed, 18,735 were wounded, and 5,425 were missing and captured. The battle left the town in complete disarray. Farms and homes were destroyed, as well as many animals, and for a farming community, that's a disaster. Like, you lose your animals, your entire livelihood is gone. The town was also left dealing with around 51,000 casualties. The dead were often buried in shallow graves, and wounded filled literally every available building, including private homes and churches. A tent hospital known as Camp Letterman General Hospital was set up east of Gettysburg so that the wounded could essentially be shuttled there before being taken off to real hospitals. So like in Philadelphia, I think Harrisburg was a hospital, places around that could actually deal with this. I didn't do a lot of research into this, but keep in mind, these field hospitals were not nice places. These men were severely injured, and they did not have anesthesia.
They had alcohol.
So, and they did not know like the intricacies of taking a bullet out of a wound. A lot of times,
they just took the extremity.
Yes,
Chop.
Exactly. And I mean, hideous, bad.
That is actually the phrase, bite the bullet. You
Yes.
were literally biting bullets during surgeries, quote unquote.
This is also before we knew about things like why infections happen.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
So,
Or, cleaning instruments between,
right.
trying to extract bullets or having to take off limbs.
Yeah. So, I mean, dirty tools, dirty hands. The stench, I can only imagine, was just unbearable. So, a portion of the battlefield was eventually purchased to become a cemetery for the Union dead, but the bodies did not start to be exhumed until fall of that year, and many of the Confederates were buried in mass graves and remained there until 1870. So, despite the disaster that was Pickett's charge, the second day of the battle was the bloodiest. 20,000 of the 100,000 men would be injured, killed, or captured, or missing in action by July 3rd. One area central to the fighting on the second day is the wheat field that I mentioned. The wheat field is tiny. It's only 19 acres. And to put this in perspective, 1 square mile can hold 640 acres. So this is a tiny, tiny little patch of land. And it turned into one of the bloodiest places on the battlefield. Another place on the battlefield I wanted to talk about is Iverson's Pits, which I had not heard of this before, or if I had forgotten about it. The area known as Iverson's Pits is a spot of farmland that became infamous on the first day of the battle. A Confederate commander, Brigadier General Alfred Iverson, led a brigade of North Carolina infantrymen to march on a tree line along the edge of the battlefield. Along the edge of this field. However, a stone wall ran along the front left side of the field, and as soon as the Confederate brigade were out in the open, the Union troops rose up from behind the wall and just mowed them down, like in droves. By the end of it, 900 Confederate men were left dying in the grass, just pretty much in lines. Just literally, from the sounds of my research, these men were just mowed down line for line. They just dropped where they marched. And anyone who was able to beat a hasty retreat did. This all happened in a matter of minutes. Like, this did not, from what I could tell, did not take long. It was horrible. Iverson himself suffered a nervous breakdown after this and was actually sent home in disgrace.
Whoops.
Yeah.
Oh, that's sad.
Yeah. Because it sounds like he was at the back, like, basically safe in the back of all this, and just watching his troops that he had told to march on this field
Get obliterated.
Get decimated. So, yeah.
Yeah, that would give anyone a really tough time.
Right. And, I mean, there were notes saying that he made a mistake by not sending initial skirmishers forward to keep an eye out for an ambush. There was a bunch of stuff that was, I guess, would have been considered commonplace knowledge that you should do, and it didn't happen. Ugly. So moving on from that, let's talk about Devil's Den. Devil's Den is the landmark I mentioned as typically known as a mass of boulders sitting roughly 500 yards from Little Round Top. However, the actual, quote, Devil's Den, according to licensed battlefield guide Gary Edelman, is a small cave hidden amongst these rocks. According to Edelman, there are 6 different ways in and out of this cave. I want to put this in here, y'all. To be clear, if you decide to visit Gettysburg and or Devil's Den, we are not encouraging you to try and enter this cave. This area is literally a huge mass of boulders, and if I can understand correctly, this cave is essentially made by these boulders, like a section in these boulders. If you try to get into this cave, you could get stuck, you could get injured, possibly worse. I've heard too many cave diving stories. I've heard too many caving stories, spelunking stories where people get stuck and they cannot get out and they die. We do not want this to happen to you.
I'd say once every 3 or 4 years someone tries this and then they end up having to get like the rescue teams out to get them out.
Yes.
There's also the risk of carbon monoxide.
Mm-hmm.
Monoxide? Yes. It's essentially, you can't see, but the deeper you go into these caves, the less oxygen there may be as the vegetation and decaying things around convert the oxygen into carbon dioxide.
Yes. Yeah.
Dioxide?
Monoxide?
Monoxide?
Dioxide?
Either way, gas that is not meant to be breathed by human beings.
The stuff that you get rid of when you breathe.
Yes. Also, rescue efforts could be hindered due to the boulders surrounding the cave. It's not necessarily easy to get in there. And this historical site could possibly be damaged for trying to get someone out. Which, obviously, like, any human life is more important than that. I would hope anyone would do anything possible. But let's just avoid this altogether. Please visit, please explore, but please do so responsibly. We care about you. Do not hurt yourselves. There's my soapbox. So these boulders are really, really big, several being over 20 feet high, and they form a maze of like passages and crevices to hide in and maneuver. I'm not gonna lie, it's fun to hang out there. It's fun to visit. It's fun to like move in and out of these passages carefully. I feel like a mom. So while it makes sense that people may assume the name Devil's Den came from fighting during the Battle of Gettysburg, because this was an area occupied by Confederate troops, it actually gained the name long before the battle. It's not 100% certain where the name truly originated, but there was a legend among Gettysburg residents that the boulder formation was the home of a giant snake nicknamed the Devil. So, allegedly, the site was believed to be a Native American hunting ground, as well as the site of a First Nation clash known as the Battle of the Crows. So, back to pre-Gettysburg, even if natives weren't necessarily living there at that time, certainly that area was in use. During the battle, as I said above, the Confederates were able to capture Devil's Den. From this position, Confederate sharpshooters were able to take deadly aim at the Union forces sitting on Little Round Top. In response, the Union forces aimed cannon fire at Devil's Den, which killed a lot of these sharpshooters. It was actually the blast concussion that killed several of them, because the rocks just amplified that sound and just vibrated it everywhere.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's horrifying.
Uh-huh. Despite all this, the Confederates still held Devil's Den until the very end of the battle. That was a Confederate area until they retreated. The area is also known for the paranormal. I'm not going to go too far into this, but I thought it was interesting to mention. Right after the fighting at Little Round Top and Devil's Den had died down, Confederate guards were sent to guard the area again until the end of the battle. Even then, so shortly after the fighting, the guards spoke about having supernatural experiences during their watches. So, creepy stuff happening.
Oof.
Yeah. This is wild history, friends. I want to talk about Jenny Wade. Part of the town of Gettysburg sat right on the front lines of the battle at East Cemetery Hill. So the town was unfortunately not left untouched by the battle. However, due to most of the residents taking cover in any place that they could, there was only one civilian death of the battle. One Jenny Wade. Mary Virginia Wade, aka Jenny, was born 20 years before the battle and was one of 6 children. Jenny's sister Georgiana, aka Georgie, lived in a house close to East Cemetery Ridge in Gettysburg. Her husband was actually in the Union Army, but was not present at the battle. On June 26 of 1863, so very close to the start of the Battle of Gettysburg, Georgia gave birth to a son, only to have Union cavalrymen ride into town 4 days later. So she's got a newborn, and this battle is impending. At that point, Jenny and her mother joined Georgia in Georgia's home, both to seek shelter from this battle that was looming, and then also to help her care for this little baby. Throughout the battle, the family tried to help the soldiers where they could. On the morning of July 3rd, Jenny was kneading dough that was meant to become bread that they were going to distribute to the Union soldiers. But unfortunately, a stray bullet shot through the house. From what I read, it went through 2 closed doors, hit her in the shoulder, got lodged in her heart, and killed her instantly. If I understand correctly, I think it hit her in the back of the shoulder blade and went, through her body. So, not the front of her shoulder. It was... that's how I understood from the research. If that's incorrect, I apologize.
And if I'm not mistaken, there are still marks of bullets on the Jenny Wade house, which still stands in Gettysburg.
Yes. There was actually, I read, unexploded ordnance that was lodged in the wall for 15 years after until it was removed.
Holy cow.
Spicy!
So, good. I want to make a note here, because I'm going to go on a tirade. In case someone decides to go back and read the article I linked about Jenny Wade, this is the direct quote from the article. It, meaning the bullet, lodged itself in her heart and got trapped in her body by the corset she was wearing. To me, this kind of makes it sound like, oh, well, if it weren't for that darned corset, maybe she'd not have died. I don't think that's true. I really don't think that's the case. I tried to do a little more research into it, and I started to go down a rabbit hole. It was going to be way too long to add into this episode, but from what I understand, the bullet traveled through her heart, and that's what killed her. And especially at this time, I think it's safe to say a direct bullet wound to the heart would have been fatal. I mean, the first open heart surgery wasn't performed until literally decades later. I am neither a ballistics expert nor a corset expert, but my personal view is that the bullet to the heart killed Jenny, not the fact that she was wearing a corset.
I am both first aid certified and have made several corsets in my day.
Yes.
So let me kind of expand upon that. Corsets are essentially alternating a tube of alternating boning, which is usually, in the 1860s would have been whalebone or steel.
Okay, it would be either
and
or.
Then
okay.
Panels of fabric.
Yes.
The bonings would have been maybe 1/8 of an inch wide.
Right.
Very thin. And then the fabric would have been cotilles, very popular right now. I'm sure it would have been a cotton or silk if you could afford it.
Because I feel like a lot of times today, the one that I wear for reenacting is cotton duck.
Yeah.
So
duck canvas is very stiff.
It would have been a sturdy, because it's a bra.
Yes, that's exactly.
What is cotton duck? It's like a canvas. It's like a thick canvas.
It's called duck canvas.
No
it's
duck.
a very. No.
I'm just running around in my corset at World War II events, at Wild West events, going whack, whack, whack.
I didn't know if it was like duck skin in it or something.
Oh, no.
Feathers okay.
No.
I know
it's
nothing
a
about
type
this.
of cotton.
Anyway, sorry.
There's also, of course, this big idea that corsets were laced very tight to fit. No, they were essentially bras, and they were laced as tightly as they needed to be to make sure they stayed on and made sure everything was kind of in its proper place.
Exactly.
They were probably about as comfortable as bras are nowadays, which varies from opinion to opinion.
Exactly.
But if anything, I would imagine that a corset properly laced would have provided some compression over the wound.
Yeah.
Assuming that it didn't make it all the way through both sides of it, which, given how corsets were constructed, it may not even have covered the entire space where her heart is. They generally...
Overbust corsets were used, but it was not in this time period. I feel like that was like a later...
No, underbust corsets are relatively new. Overbust corsets are actually kind of the norm.
Oh! Like they actually covered the full...
Well...
Like the sternum?
Oh.
They come to like here, which is about halfway up your sternum. I would think that a corset that was laced properly would provide compression over a wound.
Right, not...
If it was over the wound at all. Mm-hmm. It sounds like... Because...
Came in here and was...
Because corsets are actually lower in the back, so they'll...
Right.
Because it wouldn't have been... Yeah.
It definitely doesn't cover all the way up to your shoulder blade. Like, it might cover, like, just below it, but it's not going to reach up high enough to block it.
It's absolutely not going to go up that far, unless it was... We see some corsets now that have, like... Or later Victorian times did have corsets that had kind of shoulder straps to kind of help with that posture, and that... Especially when we got to a later time where bustling in the back was very common. But right now, in the Civil War, we're very much about big hoop skirts and a very more...
Like a bell shape.
Yeah. So we're not going to see that. We're going to see very kind of stereotypical corsets where it's essentially a tube. Yeah. An hourglass tube.
Right. And even if if the bullet was angled down, like from the back of her shoulder through the heart and then like out lower where it would have hit the corset... A little piece of boning is not going to stop a bullet.
Also,
like,
if it made it far enough through her body to come out to the front of the corset, she's dead already.
Yeah, she was not gonna live through that, and I just wanted to bring it up because to me, I don't know that the author meant it to sound this way, but it felt very like, oh, that darned corset, that bullet got caught in her corset, they could have gotten it out. It's like,
again,
she got hit in the heart. So to finish out on Jenny Wade, the dough that Jenny was kneading was actually finished being baked into bread by her mother and was given to the Union soldiers. And eventually, Jenny was buried in the Evergreen Cemetery where President Lincoln delivered the Gettysburg Address after the battle. And she was given a large tombstone and a perpetually raised American flag in her honor. This is one of the few sites where a flag is perpetually raised in honor of a woman. And her mother was also successfully able to petition the U.S. government for a pension for her daughter's death in 1882. Georgia's house is now known as the Jenny Wade House and is open for tours to this day in Gettysburg. So the last thing I have here in my notes is I want to talk about the Confederate sharpshooter photograph. There's a very famous photo from the Battle of Gettysburg of a dead Confederate sharpshooter collapsed among the boulders of Devil's Den with his gun leaning against a stone wall that's beside him. It looks like the stones were kind of built up between two boulders to be something to hide behind, essentially, for when you're doing your sniper job. However, this photo was actually staged. So on July 5th, the day after General Lee retreated, a photographer named Alexander Gardner, along with his assistant, Timothy O'Sullivan, arrived at the battlefield to document the carnage. He would later publish his photographs in Gardner's Photographic Sketchbook of the War. So the men took a photo of a dead Confederate soldier on the slope of Devil's Den. This photo was titled A Sharpshooter's Last Sleep. They also took another photo of a fallen Confederate within the boulders of Devil's Den, that's the one I just described, titled The Home of a Rebel Sharpshooter. Over a century later, these two photographs came into question. A historian by the name of William A. Frazanito, after studying the photographs, started to question the truth behind the photos. For one, after studying them, he believed the Confederate in both photos was the same man.
Oh, they got lazy. They got lazy.
They did get lazy. Secondly, it appeared that he wasn't even a sharpshooter. In the first photo, A Sharpshooter's Last Sleep, Frazanito came to the conclusion that the supposed sharpshooter was actually an infantryman killed while trying to get up the hillside. He believed that the photographer, after documenting the body, noticed the rocky niche 40 yards away and decided to move the body to re-photograph him a second time. He also believed the gun... Yeah, gross. He also believed the gun propped against the stony wall was a prop, as it wasn't even the type of gun typically used by sharpshooters.
What the hell?
They got lazy.
Yeah. So to cap everything off, when Home of a Rebel Sharpshooter was published in the Gardner's Photographic Sketchbook of the War, Gardner stated that he returned to the battlefield in November and claimed that the body and the gun were still there. Just hadn't been found, apparently. However, according to Frazanito, that made no sense, because the body would have been the body wouldn't have just been left there to rot, it would have been buried. And also, there were a lot of relic seekers who would have stolen that rifle long before Gardner ever returned to the battlefield in November. Overall, through the scope of seeing things 100 years later, it looked like Gardner had been telling a tall tale. In the Library of Congress article I used for reference, it was stated, quote, "Like other Civil War photographers, Alexander Gardner sometimes tried to communicate both pathos and patriotism with his photographs, reminding his audience of the tragedy of war without forgetting the superiority of his side's cause." So essentially, he wanted to take and caption a photograph that would stir up the emotions of viewers in a way that would be sympathetic to the Union cause. And he thought moving a dead man was a good idea.
Gross.
Yeah, then.
I'm like, sorry guys, that's... Sir, don't
move dead bodies.
Don't do that. That's really disrespectful.
We'll get into
That's gross.
respecting the dead in a little bit. Now that we've had the history of both Gettysburg before the battle and during the battle itself, we're going to move into some of the paranormal stories. I want to start with a little soapbox. That, I think all three of us and the dog that has joined us enjoy spooky and supernatural stories a lot, right?
Yeah.
But I want to stress that we're also talking about people, real events and real people for the most part for a lot of these stories that may have died pretty horrifying deaths. And I want to make sure we're doing this in a respectful way. So keeping that in mind, I'm going to try and do that yes, we're sharing scary stories, but people died horrifyingly.
Yeah.
So that's just a little soapbox I have about paranormal tourism, to be honest.
No, absolutely.
If it's done respectfully, and maybe this is a hot take, but if it's done respectfully, I'm okay with that. But I don't like when people use stories of people's deaths to just make money.
Yeah.
And I'm not accusing Gettysburg of that. I like to shout out my sources. So I got a couple of sources for this one. The Ghosts of Gettysburg by Gettysburg Battlefield Tours, Ghost of Gettysburg by the Travel Channel, and I have a book called Guide to the World's Supernatural Places by National Geographic.
Can I borrow that?
Yeah. Yeah, that was a birthday present or Christmas present from my sister-in-law.
Nice.
Yes.
They know me well.
Yes.
Out of curiosity, we talked a lot about Gettysburg. Have either of you visited any of the other Civil War battlefields?
Not outside of Gettysburg.
Same here.
I've been to Antietam, and it has a very, we've all been to Gettysburg. Gettysburg has a very specific vibe to it.
It does.
And Antietam is very similar, and I had a kind of weird experience. I won't talk about that on this podcast, but I've been to Antietam, and it's weird because Antietam happened right before Gettysburg,
Okay.
and to see some of the names of generals, I'm like, oh, you're not going to have a good next battle.
Ooh.
You're not gonna have a good time in a couple weeks, buddy.
that's such a weird.
That's eerie.
It is like seeing. I'm like, oh, I know that you don't make it out next. Like it's just
like I just got like prickles on my shoulders to like.
Yeah.
Oh.
My husband and I went to Harper's Ferry. We tend to.
Oh yeah, I've been to Harper's Ferry.
Yeah, we tend to go there quite a bit. And the first time we went to Antietam too, and I'm like, oh, this is so eerie because like, oh, I know what happens to you next, and it's not good.
Ooh.
As mentioned earlier in this episode, the Battle of Gettysburg was July 1st of 1863, ended on July 3rd, 1863. It's the turning point of the war, or considered, and it was one of the bloodiest battles. Also, if I remember correctly, while they were able to recover a lot of the soldiers that were buried, they weren't able to recover all of the remains.
I believe there are. I don't know how recently it was, but I feel like they were fine. I feel like the number 1970s is sticking out, that they were still finding remains.
I know decomposition happens actually pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Especially if you're just kind of buried in the earth.
Yeah.
And with the environmental stuff that...
And as hot and as humid as it was,
it would not have been.
It would not have been easy to recover entire people.
Yeah. It would have been like parts. Yeah.
So I guess what I'm saying is that there is a good chance there are still some remnants of remains buried under the battlefield. So please keep that in mind when you visit.
Yeah, I can't say that surprises me, honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's, it can sometimes give you a different view of what when you're there.
Yeah.
There was... Can I just throw this in here? I'm sorry. There was a person one time, that I had been friends with that was a reenactor, and it was a couple. It was me, my partner, and a couple of our reenacting buddies, and this one person said, "Oh, guys, you want to go get McDonald's? We can go up eat on the battlefield where a bunch of people died." And I was like, "Oof, the truth there." Hit us with that truth bomb.
Oh yeah, it's fun things to think about. So, like Christiana was saying, the cleanup process was ghastly. And if I remember correctly, just from past things I've heard, it was mostly the people in the town that did the cleanup.
Yeah.
It wasn't necessarily the Confederate were way on their way out
at
that
point. They were gone.
So were the Union, though. They didn't really stick around to help.
Exactly.
So then you have all these townspeople who are cleaning up, deceased animals, deceased people.
Their own homes in some cases.
Yeah. The rubble of their own buildings, their businesses, their homes.
Yeah.
Just trying to piece it back together as best they could.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is this was not a fun time for anyone.
Yeah.
So there are a couple, getting into more of the less sad part of my section. There's a couple different sites that I'm going to talk about. But let's start with just some common paranormal activity in general in Gettysburg. So apparitions of soldiers are reported quite often. The sounds of cries and battle shouts, phantom smells of tobacco. I don't have this in here, but also I think phantom cannon and
fire.
Gunshots and stuff. I will say, depending on what time of year you're visiting, it might not be ghosts.
Yeah. Keep in mind, reenactments happen near Gettysburg a lot, friends. Camps happen a lot.
Especially around the
July and
Yeah.
Especially in the summer.
Yes. Yeah.
So, some supposed hotspots, and we talked about some of these already, but we're going to go into more of the spooky stuff. A lot of this comes from the Travel Channel and Gettysburg battlefield tours. So, Devil's Den. Christiana gave us a nice, hi-yo, history and facts, and now we're going to get into the less factual stuff.
Yeah.
This rock formation was used by Confederate snipers during the battle. Christiana already talked about the story of it being named after a big snake that lived there.
Mm-hmm.
Also, this made me think of things. So I'm from a couple hours north of Gettysburg, and that Pennsylvania Dutch area has a lot of stories about hoop snakes. Is that a thing in this area?
I recognize the name.
Have I talked about them?
No, I didn't cover any of the paranormal stuff, but I have always been a big fan of the paranormal, and I watch the Travel Channel often. But I feel like I've come across the stories of hoop snakes previously. Aren't they vaguely Ouroboros where they're biting their tails?
Yep,
and just...
and then they go. and then they make a hoop, and then they just roll.
I thought that's what it was.
Guys, I'm really tired. I had this image of a snake biting his tail, rolling through the town, and just going, they see me rolling.
It wasn't... So, one of the things I did in school in 5th grade, and I remember this because I got heat stroke that day.
Oh, no!
Was we had, like, reenactment day where a bunch of historians came in, and one of the games they taught us that kids used to play was, like... was the hoop, where you just kind of push a hoop around with a stick.
Sticks. They were
so
wild.
Like
I don't know, but like I just know it's like a Pennsylvania Dutch Berks County. So like if any of you guys have heard of like Reading, Allentown, Kutztown, a lot of like the older Pennsylvania Dutch people talk about hoop snakes. I don't know if it's related to that game with the ball of the hoop and the stick, but
right. And these snakes just rolled around?
Yeah. They just grabbed their tails, made a hoop, and went.
They just went like that? That's all they did?
I want to be reincarnated as well.
I guess that's kind of efficient since you don't have legs anymore. But...
Exactly.
I will say I only lived in that area the first 18 years of my life, and I have never seen a hoop snake.
Dang.
They know you're coming, and they're like, oh my god, we pretend to be a normal snake.
They're with the alba twitches.
Alba twitches riding the hoop snakes. Okay, let's get back to ghosts.
Oh.
Like Christiana said, for Devil's Den, the ghost stories started pretty much immediately after the battle ended. We already talked about the debunked photo.
Yeah.
So other paranormal hotspots. Now I'm going to go into more detail on some of these. Other ones I'm not. But the round tops are supposed to be haunted. The entire battlefield is supposed to be haunted.
Right.
The round tops, the peach orchard, the wheat field, the triangle field, which is kind of right next to the wheat field.
Yeah, it's the wheat field.
Is one of the points on it?
So, again, without a map, this is kind of hard. Devil's Den is point A. The triangular field is, like, essentially right next to it, and I believe it was the site of a Confederate charge.
It was a pretty bloody, like...
Yeah, it was hard to find info on that. I wanted to get information on the triangular field, and I'm not gonna lie, I kind of just gave up, because I was like, this is ridiculous. Like, it was very difficult to find anything.
That's fair.
Which is weird, because it was a huge area of fighting, so I don't understand why there's such little out there on it, but anyway.
The area of Pickett's Charge is another one, especially there's a wooded horse trail behind that. Mm-hmm. And there's reports of hearing things. We're going to talk about the Tilly Pierce house. So the ghost stories that go with this is there's a little girl that haunts the house with laughter and footsteps, and that is the most horrifying thing.
Yes.
Little girl ghosts.
Honestly, I am like the least terrified by the
children.
I don't know if it's because I just grew up in a nursery.
Oh,
or
yeah.
if I'm just like, that's just a kid. Okay, whatever. Going back to sleep.
Go back to sleep.
I just kind of assume little girl ghosts are demons.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I also grew up in a house filled with porcelain dolls. So
no.
So did I. We have very different reactions to them.
Yeah, I'm just like, they're fine. My mom collects them, so we just have them scattered throughout the house, and I'm like, this is fine.
My grandmother had a collection of porcelain dolls, and she wanted me to have them in the worst way, and she willed them to me, and I felt like, let me tell you, when I say I felt like the biggest heel when I found a new home for them. But I was like, I don't want these.
My great-grandmother collected clown dolls.
Oh my god, that's even worse.
And I have 2 of them.
Oh!
They're very cute. I'm sorry. One plays music and, like, does a little dance.
Until it starts doing that at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Stop!
I'd be okay with that, honestly.
You're like, you know what?
We're bros.
I'm too tired for this. You stay over there. I'm gonna stay over here. You wake me up, I'm gonna hurt you. That's it.
I still have nightmares about my mom's porcelain dolls.
Oh, sorry.
But no, I have nightmares every once in a while that, like, I'll be at my parents' house, their old house, because I don't know where the dolls are. Now I didn't ask.
Yeah.
And I'll open the door to my bedroom, and there'll just be a doll staring at me, and I'll close it, and I'll move. And then I had a dream that it was, like, harassing my dog.
Oh, no.
Anyway,
no, not the dog.
I appreciate the porcelain dolls that you have, Teddy, because you like them.
Yes.
Not a single one of them is haunted.
That's good.
That's what they want you to think.
No. No, I've picked up haunted stuff.
Yeah.
They're simply vibing.
They're just chilling. They're cool.
I appreciate that for you.
Yes.
All right,
this is literally no shade to anyone who likes dolls. Genuinely, it just everyone has their thing.
They just scare me, and as do clowns.
Yeah.
Jenny Wade House. So this has been on a lot of ghost shows. As Christiana said, it's the home of the only civilian casualty in the battle. Technically, the Jenny Wade House is her sister's house. Mm-hmm. It didn't really tell me what the hauntings were in the Jenny Wade House. I think it's probably things like apparitions and sounds and stuff, but...
I just have an image because everyone's just like, oh, the Jenny Wade House, this is where Jenny Wade lived. And it's not. It's where Georgia lived. And I just have the image of her apparition being in the corner, like, it's my house. Like the meme of the guy standing there, like, with his hands on his hips, like, what? Get out of my house.
I'm not entirely sure what exactly the haunting... They said it's haunted. They didn't tell what the hauntings were. I could have gone on Reddit or something, but I didn't feel like it.
Yeah, it's all good.
Then we have Iverson's Pits. This is very... Currently, what is there is a Doubleday Inn.
Yeah.
And it's close to the former site of the Forney House, which means that the Forney House must have moved at some point.
I don't know about the Forney House. I would if that's what the research said was the former site. I'm assuming they probably moved it. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, I don't know that. Maybe I read the stuff wrong, but anyways, there's a Doubleday Inn according to the articles I read.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen a Doubleday Inn. That
would be such a, oh my goodness! Like I like spooky stuff, but I don't know that I would stay. Like, knowing what happened there.
Yeah, it's such a horrific thing that happened, the ambush.
Like I said earlier, it was a mass burial ground. A brigade of North Carolina soldiers were killed and buried in this location. So what's reported there are orbs, lights, mists, and shadow figures. It's like all of the things.
Yeah.
Sachs Bridge, has everyone been there?
I have been, yes.
Okay.
It's very pretty.
Have you been to Sachs Bridge, Teddy?
Again, I grew up going to Gettysburg often, so
okay.
I probably have been to all of these places. Was I ever told that what they were? Probably not.
Sachs Bridge is kind of off the beaten path, though.
It's a covered bridge.
Oh, I think I have like a vague memory of a covered bridge.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
For fun, my grandfather would take all of his grandkids, like just driving through Gettysburg. So.
Oh, fun. But
yeah. It's pretty. It's a pretty area. It's really pretty.
Yeah, I really like Sachs Bridge. It is very, very pretty. So the story that goes with this, and I'm pretty sure this was debunked at this point, was that there were 3 Confederate deserters that were hung on the bridge.
Ooh.
I don't think that was actually true. People say they smell cigar smoke, sounds of ghostly cannons, like I said earlier. Depending on what time of year it is, it's very likely you're hearing a real cannon.
Mm-hmm.
And this last one's the worst, feeling a tap on your shoulder.
Nor. Don't touch me.
I wouldn't mind that. I can't think of a covered bridge without thinking of the Johnny Depp movie, Sleepy Hollow. Alright, Gettysburg College, like we said, that was there during the time of the battle. There were at least 3 colleges. I don't know if they're counting the seminary in that.
Oh!
It was the seminary. It was the seminary and Gettysburg College that were there.
Okay. And then Harrisburg Area Community
was
College?
A little ways off.
A little ways off, and I think the newest.
Okay.
If I'm not mistaken.
But yeah, the kind of opposite of Cemetery Ridge is Seminary Ridge.
Mm-hmm. That's not confusing.
Yeah.
Oh, just a little bit, yeah. And Cemetery Ridge has the cemetery. Seminary Ridge has a Lutheran seminary. And there's a chapel with beautiful acoustics. Gettysburg College was called Pennsylvania College during the battle.
Okay.
Penn Hall was used as a Confederate field hospital. Elevator story.
Ugh.
I read this in these articles, and I also like to watch the Travel Channel when I was younger for all the ghosty stuff. Do you guys know about this story?
I don't think I know, specifically, but I feel like I have a guess.
Whenever I get in an elevator, I think about this.
Ugh.
And you're the one that's
I don't like elevators.
Is this the story where a college student, just got on the elevator and it just wouldn't move?
No.
No? Okay, I've heard of it.
I don't remember if it was a college student or staff, but they were in one of the older halls. There wouldn't have been an elevator during the battle, but that's not neither here nor there.
Dumbwaiter, maybe?
Well, I think it probably would have just been a lower level that was there.
Right.
And it would have been stairs, not an elevator.
Right.
But this is modern day, so we're talking within maybe the last 40 years.
Okay.
And so these people get on this elevator and they go down to a lower floor, probably to leave the building. And when the elevator door opens, they are like in the past. It's like a time slip.
Oh, this is like the elevator game.
Oh, yes. Yes. Except they weren't playing the elevator game.
They weren't trying to play the elevator game.
Listeners, don't play the fucking elevator game.
Yeah.
If you want to know about the elevator game, listen to Believing the Bizarre. They did an episode. They're on like their fourth course. They're on their fourth Cursed Games episode or fifth, but elevator game was one of the first.
We are not encouraging you to play it.
Now, if you do when you make it to the other side, let us know, and we'll do a podcast for multiple dimensions.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Call in.
Call in. So, anyways, the elevator opens, and what they are greeted to is a very ghastly scene because this building was used as a field hospital. So they're literally watching the doctors and the medical staff like doing amputations, doing all that stuff, and I can only imagine they started hitting the buttons really hard to go back up.
Yeah.
But it's just a short story, but it's like the elevator opens and they are literally transported to the past.
Yeah, it's...
Ugh.
Elevators do kind of act as portals. Have you ever been in a hotel and just you're going to the vending machine or something, kind of like before you go to bed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a liminal space.
Very liminal spacey.
Yeah.
Well, we usually travel with the doggo, and we were in this high-rise hotel in Toronto, Canada, and I had to take her, because I'm not taking her down 13 flights of stairs or whatever it was. It wasn't 13. It might have been like...
She's an old lady.
I'm not going down that many stairs either. And she, she hated others, but by the end she was like, yes, I'm a penthouse dog. Worship me. But it's weird because, I wasn't taking her out by myself at midnight, but early morning and a little bit later, it's like there's no one there, and I'm walking through the lower part conference center to take her outside.
Yeah. Big liminal
Eerie.
space vibes.
Yeah.
So next, we're going to go somewhere even more eerie, to the children's orphanage.
Ooh.
I've heard this story.
There's a pretty sad story. So this was originally a private home, and like many of the buildings and, homes, farms, churches, was used as a field hospital, just because there was an overwhelming amount of injured people.
Right.
Yeah.
It was converted to the National Soldiers Orphan Homestead for children who had lost their parents in the battle. There was a story of a matron who was pretty awful. She basically abused the children, did not do nice things to them.
Yeah.
Good.
No, I've heard this story a couple times, and it makes me just I don't want to use the word violently angry, but like the kind of anger that you can feel in your body.
Yeah.
That causes physical sensations.
Yeah. How can you do that to people?
We won't go too far into the actual happenings.
Sure.
But the orphanage has been on a lot of ghost shows. I'm pretty sure it was on Taps.
It was definitely on Ghost Adventures. I mean, if you watch any top 10 list on YouTube, at least every channel's covered this orphanage at least once.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have I don't remember which show, if it was Taps or I don't actually watch Ghost Adventures, but I might have been watching Ghost Adventures that day. Who knows?
You don't watch any of their more recent stuff.
No. I remember them putting toys and stuff out with voice recorders and EMF detectors to try and get the little, because they're supposed to be the ghosts of the children. Some of them still there.
Yeah.
So that's not super happy. The Daniel Lady Farm, is that where the reenactments are?
Some, yes, there are some reenactments there.
Once again, you're gonna hear me say this a lot. Confederate field hospital of some sort. It's, oh hey look, our friend, the ghost of General Isaac Ewell or Ewell, and his troops are supposed to haunt the farm. Have you been any reenactments there? Did you see any ghosts?
I have a story. I will tell it. I have it. Yes.
Okay. Then we have the Cashtown Inn. So this is outside of town, about 8 miles on Route 30 going toward Chambersburg. In case you're curious, there is a bed and breakfast and there is a restaurant there. Mm-hmm. Another shout out, there is a local-ish to South Central PA podcast called Strange Familiars. Mm-hmm. They do a lot for the Alba Twitch stuff as well.
Yes!
he stayed there one night and did a episode on it. I won't talk about his and his wife's experiences or whoever went with him. Check out their episode if you want to hear
more about that.
Yeah, because I don't want to steal their stuff.
Sure.
This is the site, according to my research, this is the site where the first soldier was killed during the Gettysburg campaign. Don't know if that's true or not, but that's what I read. One of the either previous owners or former owners is Jack Palladino and his wife, who is unnamed.
So sad.
Have pictures from 1987 through 2007 of strange orbs and skeletons showing up in their photos.
Fun.
I think there's also some reports of like people seeing apparitions in their rooms or hearing people like opening doors and that kind of thing. Lights turning on and off on their own. Oh, it says it right there. Also, lights turning on and off on their own. Doors locking and unlocking themselves.
Ooh.
That would suck. And then
thank you.
People thumping on, like they'll hear people knocking on doors, thumping on doors.
Ooh.
Next one, the Gettysburg Hotel. So there's a ghost. There are portrait of a ghost of a woman who has been seen dancing in the hotel's ballroom.
Oh,
Is that going to be you as a ghost?
probably, yeah.
Okay.
As I'm a poltergeist.
Oh, that's right.
And or a reincarnated
No.
hoop snake.
Side note, I'm okay with being a singing ghost if the whole Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come thing doesn't pan out for me.
Yes.
I want to be the Ghost of Christmas Present. That was always my favorite A Christmas Carol character.
Yeah.
So you can dance and I can sing in the afterlife.
We'll be a bardic troupe.
Are you gonna join us?
I can do a little bit of both, so yeah.
Oh, perfect.
Wonderful.
Yeah, one of my useless skills is that I know how to waltz.
Oh, I love a waltz. I love a good waltz.
Same.
Ugh.
We have this all planned out.
Perfect. We got it, guys.
So besides our wonderful ghost lady who dances, there's also the Union soldier James Culbertson of Company K, Pennsylvania Reserves, who is supposed to haunt this building. And then via the National Geographic book, as far as our nice dancing lady, she's waiting for her lover and was told he died, so she then drank herself to death, and that is why she's still at the hotel.
Oh.
Balladary Inn. I had never heard of this one before either.
I hadn't heard of the pits before.
I hadn't either.
Hello?
Yeah.
So this is located on Hospital Road. Wonder how it got that name.
Yeah.
The inn served as a Union Field hospital during day 2 of the battle in Gettysburg. I would imagine probably past that as well. According to an unnamed psychic, it's haunted by Confederate soldiers buried under the tennis court.
Ooh.
No.
So I don't know if I would be annoyed or find that funny that I was buried under a tennis court.
I feel like if I'd be less annoyed if the tennis court was there first, but if my body was there first and then they put a tennis court over me, I'd be kind of pissed.
Yeah.
Unless you really like tennis.
I mean, I guess if I liked tennis.
Like, for example, if I die and they make like a horse barn over top of me, I'd be super happy.
Yeah.
You'd love that.
Yeah. Anyways,
Art gallery over top of me. I will be painting. You will see paintbrushes moving. Hello.
I wonder what they put over top of me.
or like a music store.
Ooh. Record store.
All of a sudden, you hear Fall Out Boy songs at 3 o'clock in the morning.
All time
Sorry.
low.
Yes.
Anyways,
Anywho.
the unnamed psychic part I thought was a little interesting because, like, I read an article and I was literally like, an unnamed psychic?
No,
Oh, okay.
that's not.
Like, came onto the property and was like, you know, there's
some guys
soldiers
buried
under
in
your
your tennis court.
I'd be shook. Be like, ma'am, are you alright?
Did you just walk up and be like, hey, so you know you got bodies under your tennis court, right?
What a mic drop.
Do you just approach a random worker of the inn and be like,
Do you know about the bodies?
So,
Sir, this is a Wendy's.
Some other assorted hauntings. There's supposed to be a phantom regiment, supposedly Confederate. Didn't say where. They just are wandering around and people are hearing drums, footsteps, and hearing firearms. Once again, depending on what time of year you're there, it might not be ghosts.
Might be my partner.
might be ghosts.
No.
Your partner's haunting the battlefield? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Maybe it's ghosts. I don't know. Oh, sorry. So this regiment is seen standing among the... Okay, so maybe it's not your partner. Seen standing among the tombstones at the Soldiers National Cemetery.
Oh.
I will put in there, though, that that was mostly Union soldiers that were buried there,
Okay.
wasn't it? Confederate soldiers weren't. I think they were later, but I think wasn't it mostly Union that were buried there at first?
There was a section of the battlefield that was a Union soldier burial ground. Yes.
Okay.
So that could be that.
Okay. Well, either way. Also, the cemetery is closed at night, so why are people?
Stay out. Be respectful.
Although it doesn't say it's at night.
Oh, that's true.
Also, it's just a sign. People don't even listen to the speed limit signs.
They definitely don't.
True.
That's true. I wonder what kind of fines you get from breaking into there at night, though. Because
Is it breaking in if all you have to do is just drive past a sign? Just ignore a sign? It's not like it's guarded or anything.
I meant like the cemetery.
Oh, why would you want to go to a cemetery at night?
A lot of people enjoy doing that to go ghost hunting.
Listeners,
don't do that.
be respectful.
I don't like cemeteries during the day, even.
No. I like Sleepy Hollow Cemetery. I will say that.
I like old cemeteries where I don't know anyone buried there.
Yes.
I just feel bad walking across all those graves.
Goodness,
Yeah.
yes.
Because you don't know where they end, and you're just walking
That's the
across
thing,
a
like,
bunch of people.
I try not to.
Stepping on
And I'm
people.
just like, sorry.
Yeah, no, I 100%. I
I'm
know what
worried
you're
about
saying.
that, too.
Ugh.
All right.
Well, anyway.
My last little thing that I pulled from these articles, there's a lady in white, which is every haunted location has a lady in white or a lady in green or something.
Sure.
Exactly what it sounds like, and apparently she's seen all over. I've never heard of this before. Now, this next part makes me wonder if she is the ballroom lady, believed to be the ghost of a woman who lost her love in the battle.
Okay.
So,
Hey, but wasn't that every woman?
that is true.
That's, yeah, it's hard.
It's like everyone has a...
Oh my gosh, the Tulpa.
Ah!
She's like the manifestation of all the women.
Of all of those women.
Yeah, that's
oh,
sad.
Man. That is sad.
All right, so I have a couple of my own ghost stories. Is it okay if I share them?
Yeah.
Please.
I, one morning, very, very early, was driving out on Emmitsburg Road. So if you've ever gone to Gettysburg, that road in town starts off as Steinway. And then as you leave town and go towards 15, it becomes Emmitsburg Road. Mm-hmm. And I was pretty close to where on my right would have been, like, I was getting close to the tower.
The observation tower?
Yeah,
Okay.
so I was on my left. I don't think I was quite at, like, the, like, devil's death. Like, I wasn't quite at, like, some of that stuff, but I was making my way through the field towards the end of, like, what is considered, like, where the tours and stuff go.
Sure.
And it's obnoxiously early in the morning. And I see what I think at the moment I thought were reenactors who maybe had a little bit much to drink the night before or that morning and were riding their horses across the battlefield. That's what I thought it was at first. And so I'm like, holy crap. My first thought is their horses are going to find a hole and go
straight down.
Yeah.
Because they were riding hard.
Yeah, it was like a gallop towards the road.
Yeah.
And like as they got closer to the road, there's fencing. So I'm like, oh my god, they're not stopping. They're going to impale their horses. So at that point, I'm stopping my car. And then they get to the road, and then they vanish. And I was like, well, this is horrifying.
Like, good.
Because I thought I was going to see horses get like, impaled.
Mm-hmm. Go through a fence.
Did I care about the people? Yes, but the horses were my first concern.
We are horse people.
But, so that was, and like, I know it was, like, I know it wasn't deer. I'm from a family I grew up in a family that hunts. So, like, I know what deer look like in low light. So that was scary.
That is scary.
And then, I'm not going to say exactly where this is. It's a property owned by someone I know. I was there by myself for, I was supposed to be there. I was there to do something by myself. And I was talking to someone on the phone. I think it was my husband or a family member. And I'm in my car, and I see out of the corner of my eye, I see someone walk towards my car door.
Ooh.
And so I gave them like give me 1 minute. So I see them walk towards my car, and I give them like the 1 minute, and so I can see them out of my peripheral. And then I finish my conversation, and I'm like, hold on, there's someone here. And I turn, and there's no one. And I definitely like turned my head enough to go like, hold on. Like I couldn't make out features, but it was like there was someone there, and then there wasn't.
That quick glance to be like, yes, I acknowledge you.
Yep. I was like, give me 1 second. And then Because I thought maybe someone was just there earlier than me for whatever reason and had a question. So those are my ghosts. I'm gonna let Christiana tell her partner's stories.
Yes. So I've said before, my partner's a reenactor. He started reenacting when he was like 9 or 10 years old. He started with Civil War reenacting in the Union side, and then I forget how old he was when he switched over and started reenacting the Confederacy. And now we both do World War II. He's actually out of Civil War at this point. But he had a couple of stories that he said it is okay for me to tell. I had him write them out, so I'm going to just read them as he wrote them. First one is, I did Civil War reenacting for 18 years, and several years ago I had an interesting experience in Gettysburg. We were camped out on a historic farm that was used as a field hospital following the battle. This particular place is privately owned, but they hold a number of small events there every year. This one weekend, we were camped out. By we, he means him and his unit, his reenacting unit. This one weekend, we were camped out on the anniversary of the battle. That evening, after the public had all gone, a bunch of us decided it would be fun to hold our own little ghost hunt on the property. Once it was sufficiently dark, we all trekked into the upstairs of the bank barn. It was a hot July evening, easily still in the low to mid-80s and humid. Once in the barn, someone set up an audio recording device and a flashlight. This particular barn was primarily used as a Confederate field hospital, and a large number of Confederate soldiers perished there from wounds received during the battle. In an effort to try and get some of the wild activity, I wore a Union... Listeners, my partner and I have already discussed this. Don't do this. In an effort to get some kind of wild activity, I wore a Union uniform and we started, quote-unquote, trash-talking the Confederate leaders. Almost instantly, the temperature of the barn plummeted to the point that we could see our breath, and very quickly we all decided we did not want to stay there any longer, and we all skedaddled. A little while later, we all came back in, and the temperature had risen back to its previous level. I had changed into a Confederate uniform, an audio recording device was set up again, and a flashlight placed on an original Civil War ambulance that was parked in the barn, and we got started again. Since I had been the one in the Union uniform, and I had been the one primarily kicking the hornet's nest, I started off by introducing myself and then asking if there was anyone there, and if so, could they activate the flashlight. In response, the flashlight flickered some. I then continued by explaining what it was we were doing and why we were dressed the way we were so many years after the battle. At that point, I asked if whoever was there appreciated us trying to keep their memory and their history alive by being reenactors. In response, the flashlight immediately came on and stayed on. At this point, somebody else started talking and asking various questions. I recall that there were 10 or 12 of us all standing together in the top of this barn. I kind of zoned out, probably because I was getting tired. Somebody in the group snapped a picture, and the flash illuminated a good portion of the area, including that original Civil War ambulance wagon. When that happened, I clearly saw the body of a young Confederate soldier slumped over in the back of the wagon, with blood running down his face and chest. I was so utterly shocked that I froze for some amount of time. Eventually, someone realized that something was wrong with me, and all I remember was people having to physically help remove me from the barn. Once outside, I came around. Everyone was asking me what was wrong and if I had seen something, and if I was okay. It was then that I was finally able to get out what I had seen, to which everyone was utterly shocked. I was told later that my experience was an incredibly rare one and was done by that young man as a sign of respect. I never did get to personally hear the audio recordings, but my friend who took them home and processed them said there were very clear voices. In the first part, where I had been wearing a Union uniform, there were numerous voices screaming to get out or to shoot them. I don't recall what was in the second part, but it was much friendlier, I think. That's the first story. Friends, don't do that. Don't be disrespectful. and to be clear, my partner and I've already told him straight up, like, don't do that. That's rude. So that was his first story. His second story took place almost 20 years ago. It was maybe my second year as a reenactor, and I would have been about 10 years old. This story once again takes place on the anniversary of the Gettysburg battle. The unit I was with at the time all decided it would be fun to leave the reenactment on Saturday night and go explore the battlefield. For context, most reenactments in the United States do not take place on original battlefields, but rather on adjacent farmland. This is me cutting in, that is true. It's actually illegal to discharge a firearm on, I'm assuming it's like this on other battlefields, but on like the NPS, the National Park Service, you will get in very serious trouble if you discharge a firearm on the Gettysburg battlefield. Like, that's a big, don't do that. And it's considered, I think part of it is it's historical site, but it's also considered hallowed ground. So the Gettysburg battle reenactment that happens is not actually on the battlefield. They do not do that. It is on separate farm fields near the place.
I had no idea.
Yeah, it's interesting.
That is.
Back to the story here. We were all on top of the Devil's Den, which is the site of some of the most ferocious fighting of the war on the second day of the battle. We walked up to the top, and then we went in a westerly direction to an area known as the Triangular Field. This particular field has 3 stone walls around it and was used as a hog pen prior to the battle. When the second day's fighting took place and the Confederates were advancing towards the Round Tops, they had to cross this field. There, they took extremely heavy casualties, and it was said that the field was so dense with bodies that you could walk from one side to the other and never touch a single blade of grass. To make matters worse, at that time in history, there were wild hogs in this part of the state. It is said that the evening of July 2nd, men could be heard screaming as wild hogs were rooting through the corpses.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Yeah, sorry guys. Anyway, back to our visit. We decided it would be fun to walk from the Devil's Den down into this field. Keep in mind, every one of us is wearing Union blue. We get about halfway down the hill through this field, and it got bitterly cold. Again, it's July. Very shortly after that, I felt like I got punched in the shoulder. I don't remember the details of how he discovered it, but I remember having a perfectly round black circle on my shoulder afterwards, and all of us very quickly leaving that area. For years afterward, I would not go back to that particular field. Then one day, several years ago, I was out and about once again on the anniversary of the battle, just walking the ground and taking in a few peaceful moments to reflect upon the lives lost there so many years ago. Like normal, as a reenactor, at this point I was in a Confederate uniform and decided to take a stroll down through that field once again. This visit would be much different than my first. As I walked through the tall grass, further and further down the hill, I was absolutely overwhelmed with one of the most peaceful and welcoming sensations I've ever felt in my life. I ended up finding a boulder to sit on, and I ended up sitting and watching the sun go down for the next hour. It was the strangest feeling I've ever felt in my life. I was completely and utterly alone, yet I felt like I was surrounded by some of my closest friends. As I finally watched the sun dip below the western horizon, I knew I had to get back on my way, and yet it felt like friends were begging me not to go and to stay with them. I don't know if it was because I was wearing a Confederate uniform in a field where so many young men lost their lives, so many Southern young men lost their lives, or if it's because no one ever goes there, or maybe a combination of both, but it was honestly one of the strangest yet most memorable paranormal experiences I've ever had.
Wow.
There she blows.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he got punched in the shoulder by someone, or I think he got hit with
A ghost bullet?
a bullet. Yeah, that's what I.
That's
That's
crazy.
wild.
Crazy. Yeah.
And
Keep in mind, my partner is not. I think he and I both have pretty similar views of, like, there's stuff we can't explain, but he's not a particularly, like, superstitious person either, so I tend to, like, when he tells me he's experienced this stuff, I feel like he's probably telling me the truth, or whatever he sees is, you know, like, his version of, like, this happened to him. Whatever happened, it happened. So, you know.
I actually only have one story, and it's one of my earliest memories. It's almost more like a sensory memory,
Ooh.
if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
For context, I did write the intro, the cold open for this episode. Is that what we call it? The cold open?
Yeah.
And it is based on both my experiences and my friend's experience. My friends were the ones that sat on the cannons. I don't recommend that. Please be respectful of the historical grounds and artifacts.
Yes.
But I was a small child, probably, small enough to still be picked up. I remember the drums. I have a very distinct memory of hearing the drum roll. I'm not...
Sure.
Instrumental music is not my forte. I don't know what it would be called.
Cadence, maybe? Drum
probably.
cadence? Yeah.
I have a very distinct memory of that and being picked up and kind of taken back to the car or taken away from that area. So,
ooh. Like, you think your parents heard it too? Or was your parents you were with? Or
it was my mom that picked me up. I was probably with my grandfather and maybe my dad.
They were just getting you out of there.
They were just like, yoink!
Nope! Yoink!
Yoink! But I worked in the Gettysburg area for a long time, but it's funny, I'm pretty open to the idea of stuff happening, but I don't really have any stories other than that one. My friend would actually, when we were... how old were we? We were like 13.
Okay.
Her and her mom would just decide to go ghost hunting.
Okay.
We lived, 30, 40 minutes from Gettysburg, and on a Friday night we would just be like, hey, let's go get ice cream from Mr. G's and go ghost
yes.
and go ghost hunting. And we did.
Sure.
And it was... I don't think anything happened. I did almost lose my wallet, but that
no.
But that's because they don't make pockets deep enough for regular size wallets.
That is true.
That's very true. It's very annoying.
I don't think a ghost tried to steal my wallet.
Can you imagine?
I need this.
That's me as a poltergeist in the future.
It was a white wallet with a rainbow made out of sequins. I
love it.
Like, it was decidedly a modern piece of fashion, so I'm like, I don't know if they were fascinated, but I think it just fell out of my pocket.
Yeah. They were like, oh.
Yeah, despite living so close that we would probably go at least once a month.
Nice.
Just to go shopping.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Because there's the Gettysburg outlets and just generally more stores than the town I grew up in.
Yeah.
I really only have that one story. I have more paranormal stories from my own house
than
Gettysburg.
So that's Gettysburg, guys. So what drew us all to this topic? We live here.
No. We live here.
We're local.
I live here.
We're local, yeah.
We are local. I was particularly drawn to the idea of finding out what Gettysburg was before the battle, because it's not talked about. Everyone only talks about the Battle of Gettysburg and then forward.
Right.
You guys grew up much closer to Gettysburg than I did. Mm-hmm. And so it was always like a novelty to come here. Mm-hmm. Before I moved to this area, I only came here once, and that was like 8th grade field trip.
Oh, wow.
And the bus driver's like, I asked about ghosts. He's like, there's no ghosts.
Oh. He said, nope, we're not going there.
He's like, no, none of that's true.
Okay.
Okay.
Like I said earlier, the place has very, very interesting vibes and energy.
Yeah.
It's definitely a place that is recognizable for the energy that it gives off.
Yeah.
Ghosts aside, it's...
In and of itself, it's almost like a liminal space. In a
it
sense.
Is.
Like, it's... The modern town of Gettysburg, the National Park Service has done an amazing job preserving the battlefield. They've done a wonderful job.
Yes.
The town itself is very built up. It is very touristy. It is very... and again, that's not to say there's not really excellent parts to go visit for the history. Like, I do think they do a good job telling the history of the town. But it's... there's literally a McDonald's on the edge of the battlefield.
And KFC.
And a KFC, like, where a bunch of people died. It's bizarre. It's bizarre.
It is a very strange mix of very modern and very historical landmarks, because in the center of Gettysburg, there are very old buildings and very historic, there's tons of places that are marked that as historical landmarks, but there are also, modern bakeries and vitamin shops.
Or like a vape. I think there's a vape shop or
there's a lot of metaphysical
there are a lot of
shops. And but there's lots of things in Gettysburg.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the restaurants there, like there's some that are new and are new builds.
Yeah.
But there's a lot that really incorporate some of the older buildings.
Oh my gosh.
yeah.
The Dobbin House
Dobbin
Tavern.
House.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Going
is-
still.
Yeah. I mean, those places you're literally sitting in bedrooms and what's the word I'm looking for? Libraries
Libraries
and studies. Like, you can literally, I think they converted one of the beds to a table that you can sit in, and they have a very tiny section of the houses. They've got mannequins of this scared me as a child. They have the hideouts for the
slaves on the Underground Railroad.
Yes.
There's a panel on the wall.
It's the most narrow stairway, and it looks into this extra space in the attic. Mm-hmm. And then there's also the original well for the house that you can go see.
Right. I think is the well at Mr. G's original too?
That I'm not sure.
That I don't know.
I think it might be.
Might be, yeah.
Like it's very much a cohesive mashup of just every period in time from the late 1700s to now.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. So what did this episode change any of our views on this topic?
It expanded them. I don't think it changed my views, but
Same.
I think we also knew a good bit going into it.
Sure.
Yeah.
I definitely learned more about the battle than I knew before.
Yeah.
Like, it's so complex.
Yeah. Like Bree said, it's definitely I'm definitely learned a lot more, but I also kind of knew coming in a lot.
I think what did you say at the beginning of the episode? Like, I know a lot, but I also know very little.
It's very much, I'm technically a local, I guess, so I have a local's view of the area. Mm-hmm. But it's easy to forget when you're a local that it is a historic site.
Truly so, yeah. What did you guys find the most strange about this topic?
I think it's strange that they don't want to talk about Gettysburg before the battle. Because
true, yeah.
There's no way it wasn't some kind of significant trading post or
absolutely.
Stop at this crossroads.
Mm-hmm. I think it's strange how the generals during this battle just looked at their commanders and were like, yeah, we're not going to do that. Yeah. I'm like, how do you just blatantly,
can you do
ignore
that?
order?
Can you do that?
Dang.
Without being
court-martialed? Yeah.
It's I feel like that has serious repercussions.
Seriously, I can't imagine looking at, General Lee, the commander of the Army of Virginia, and just being like,
no. I don't think I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
I think there were some hauntings that I didn't know about, like the tennis courts.
Yeah.
It's not funny, but...
I have doubts. When someone goes, an unnamed psychic, I'm like, that doesn't feel...
It's strange.
It is. That doesn't feel like a reliable source.
Excuse me, do you know about the bodies under your garden?
Mic drop.
So we would love to hear from you. If you have a suggestion about a strange or mysterious topic, if you want to make a comment on an episode or just want to chat, you can get a hold of us a couple of different ways. On Spotify, you can comment directly on individual episodes. On Apple Podcasts, you can leave a star rating, hopefully 5, and a comment on the overall podcast. You can also reach out to us on Instagram or send us an email at somethingstrangepod24@gmail.com. All right, well, strangers, it's time for us to part ways.
Until we meet again, make sure you keep those doors closed.
We'll be back again soon with another Something
Strange.